All right, it's time to call to order for our general government city council meeting. Welcome. Division of Wildlife, we're glad to have you here, and Commissioner Tim Payne as well. Thank you. Do we need to have roll call?
Councilmember Cochran. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Here.
Councilmember Hamrick. Councilmember Jaquez.
Here.
Councilmember Meisner.
Here.
Councilmember Turner.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith.
Here.
Mayor Troutman.
Here.
All right, thank you. Would you guys mind introducing yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Jim Aragon, Area Wildlife Manager for Area 13, Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Work address is 7405 Highway 50 in Salida.
I'm Jamin Grigg. I'm the wildlife biologist based out of Salida that also covers, essentially the upper Arkansas Valley from Leadville down to Canyon City.
I'm Bob Croce. I'm one of the game wardens that's stationed here in Canyon City.
I'm Zach Holder. I'm the other game warden that's stationed here in Canyon City. I cover everything south of the Arkansas River.
Tim Payne, Fremont County Commissioner.
Do you have a presentation for us, or are we ready?
I can give a little background. It don't have a PowerPoint or a real formal presentation, but can give some background on the subject, why we're here today, and what some possible options would be for yourself and City Council to consider. And that the issue is addressing the number of deer in and around the Canyon City area.
Right. Have you been keeping records of population growth or numbers since our last conversation, and automobile accidents by any chance?
Yeah, no, we haven't. And I can ask Bob or Zach just anecdotally, what they feel, if they've seen more or less or about the same, or about the number of animal vehicle accidents that they get reported to them.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty consistent to what we had since the last time that we were here. I don't think we've seen a dramatic spike or a decrease in the number of deer. The deer calls, whether you want to call them complaints, concerns, or picking up dead deer that were hit by cars or something like that, I think has been pretty consistent. I would say on average probably 2 to 3 calls a week for myself, as far as hit or injured deer that needed to be put down. And I would think Zach probably had just as many, if not more.
Yeah, in my stuff, I've got 115 that runs through my district, so there's always a higher number, I think, right around the cemetery and that kind of stuff. I would say probably 3 to 5 calls a week about injured deer and that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I've had an increase in is complaints about deer eating flowers and aggressive behavior from fawns, or from does that are protecting fawns, on park and places like that. So I think it's pretty consistent, like Croce said.
Okay, Commissioner Payne, are you here today because the county is considering similar
I'm here because Jim Meisner invited me.
Go ahead, Jim. I'll turn this over to you for a minute.
Let me provide some information. One, I'm going to take responsibility for inviting Commissioner Payne. Keep in mind that we talked about this deer issue 8 months ago, 6 months, 8 months ago. And I put myself out front as a point person to collect comments. At the time that it came back to council, if I recall, I had about 17 emails opposed to the deer issue and 15 in favor. Somewhere in that range was basically a 50-50 balance. I had suggested to council, from my perspective, that at that point, it wasn't worth my time and effort to deal with the issue, and that we would reevaluate it whenever it became relevant. We then put the question on the citizen survey. The citizen survey indicated that 78% of the people online supported a deer harvest. The official mail-in ballot had 71%. That's basically a 2-to-1 ratio, people favoring a harvest versus not favoring a harvest. With that information at hand, I thought that it was at least appropriate for council and DOW to at least reconsider the issue. If we establish some kind of boundary, whatever DOD and us, or DOW decides, I think ultimately you talk about potentially including Lincoln Park. Relative to that, I thought it was pertinent for Tim to be here, Mr. Payne, as a representative of the commissioners to kind of get a feel for whether they want to participate in that process or whether we want to, if we can, only include city limits, or just where do we go from here? So the DOW group has offered to come back and answer any questions or present information. They brought along their biologists to provide whatever information is available. As I mentioned, they would like to be able to leave this meeting today with some kind of affirmative direction, yay or nay, because they have a large paper trail that they've got to get created. So I think you're kind of up to speed in terms of, I also forwarded those emails that I had recorded to the clerk so that they're part of public record and you have a copy of those. Generally, I think the people that are opposed, you're not going to change their mind. The people that are in favor, some of those people, they don't care, but they would like the problem addressed, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. And
Yes.
I was just going to give some background information in addition to that. We were approached by members of council about 8 months ago with a concern about the number of deer in and around Canyon City. So we had several opportunities to meet. That situation with deer in and around a city area like this is not unique to Canyon City. You can see it in Buena Vista, Salida, West Cliff. It seems like it's becoming more and more common as municipalities increase their leash law and some of that stuff. Deer just get comfortable. There's not a negative reinforcement when those animals come into town. And all the needs that they have are being met within the city limits of a lot of municipalities. And so it's something that we've looked at by state statute. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the wildlife side, we're mandated to manage wildlife populations in Colorado, not only for the residents, but for the visitors to the state as well. So we manage your wildlife basically on a statewide basis. Another statute that we follow is that one of the main management tools we'll use is the use of hunting and hunting licenses. So that's our initial approach on where we try to address management concerns. We try to do it with hunters and with hunting licenses. I've been involved in this conversation with several cities, Salida and Buena Vista and some others, and several things always come up. There's a segment of the population who would ask us to use some sort of birth control or contraceptive. For mule deer, that's the species which is the predominant one here around Canyon and some of the other cities. There is not an approved contraceptive for mule deer. I was an acting member on a citizens task force in Salida to deal or to address deer concerns with that town. And that was one thing that came up. The other thing, you can Google deer contraceptives and get several thousand hits on the internet. I think a large majority of those are in a closed system where you don't have animals in and out of a population. Either it's a high fence study area or maybe an isolated island, something like that. But like I say, as of today, there's not an approved contraceptive for mule deer. Another thing that a lot of times people will ask for us to look at is, well, why don't you trap them and take them out into the hills where they'll be happy? And they're perfectly happy in town. That's why they're here. All their needs are being met. But when you look at trapping animals, deer specifically, it's labor intensive, it's costly, and then the survival rate of those animals when you do move them, and you have to move them a fair geographical distance for to have any hopes of working. But the survival rate on those animals generally is less than 50%. So what you've gained with that is just kind of a temporary removal of animals that ultimately, they're not going to be successful on where you move them. The other thing with trapping and moving animals, what we always look at is the possibility of disease transmission. You may have some disease that it's not readily visible when you look at that animal, and you may run a risk of moving that into an area that's disease-free. Chronic wasting disease, it's not prevalent really here in the area. From Canyon City up, we haven't had any known cases, but as you get east of 114 or south of the Wetmore country, we have had some cases of chronic wasting disease show up in animals. And the only way to test for chronic wasting disease is to kill that animal and then do a necropsy and a brain test on it. So it's not something you can test on a live animal and say yay or nay that he has it. But that's a little bit of the background on kind of our management techniques or options that we have. A little bit of background on why we're here today. And one thing that we have looked at, and the way our agency runs is we receive direction from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. That's a governor-appointed board who oversees the operation of Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And so they have the authority to create or endorse regulations that deal with deer seasons, elk seasons, the number of permits we have out there, and they're who we answer to or who we receive direction from. And so when we're looking at a new regulation of creating an area where we may have an increased number of doe permits or a separate season or a longer season, what we do is we write up what we call an issue paper, and we identify what the issue is, and then we give an explanation of it and a list of possible alternatives. And we always have a preferred alternative. And so that goes through a process where it's reviewed on the regional level, goes up into a reg review out of Denver, and then once it receives the okay through that process, it's presented to the commission to act on, and they vote on those issue papers and yay or nay whether we want to pursue it or not. And so that was one thing that was fairly important about the meeting today, is that we have drafted an issue paper that we feel will address the concern with the number of deer in and around Canyon City, and that's gone through regional review, and it'll go up to Denver. But really what we need to decide today, and I can read that issue paper to you so you have a full understanding of it, but today would like to know whether we should proceed with that with your backing, or whether we should pull that and look at some other option. So.
All right. Some of your options, I've also heard from other people saying, couldn't we harvest the deer in a manner that didn't involve bow hunting, or something that would be a little more quiet or under the radar?
The issue paper we drafted, or that we have here in front of us, our recommendation, and it would be my recommendation to the city and to the council here, is that the licenses we issue would be rifle licenses. And let me explain the reason for that. In Colorado, we have a whole variety of different license types. We have archery licenses, we have muzzleloader, and we have rifle tags. If we issue an archery license, we have limitations on what a legal archery equipment is, and that's usually a recurve or a longbow or maybe a compound bow. A legal manner of take on a straight archery license does not include a crossbow or a crossbow with sights. But if you issue a rifle tag, that tag you can utilize not only a rifle, if allowed, and in the case of within the city limits of Canyon City, it would not be allowed. But by mere presence of being a rifle tag, you're allowed to use any lesser manner of take. And so that would enable a person to utilize a crossbow or a scoped crossbow, a recurve bow, a takedown, or a longbow, any lesser manner of take. The issue paper that we have in no way attempts to or supersedes any city or county regulation as far as discharge of a firearm or manner of take or things like that.
All right, are there any questions from council?
Do you have, I think in Silver Cliff they're doing it now. They have a hunt. At least that's what the mayor had told me. Would you have an idea how many animals you would have to take that would make a difference? Or is that a proper question?
No, and it's really, that would be a question that probably the council or citizens would be able to answer as well. I don't think this is a situation where you're going to get down to that desired number in 1 year, or maybe not 2 years. You didn't get into the position of having, numerous deer in town overnight, and you're generally not going to get out of it overnight. It's going to be a several year process. But I would, ask Bob and Zach maybe, what their thoughts are. And the other thing to consider is that right now we have a doe license that's valid for the same area that we're talking about. It's just for, a different season, and it's hard to draw. All our deer licenses are limited statewide, and a doe license for the area north of Highway 50 generally takes 4 or 5 preference points to draw. And that means you have to apply 4 or 5 years and be unsuccessful before you finally draw that license. And the reason for that is when you look at how we manage our deer populations, and we manage them on large geographical areas. When you look at the area north of Canyon City, and the management unit that we manage on encompasses everything up to Lake County, we generally don't have an overabundance of deer in the game management unit as a whole. But we've got these isolated pockets where number of deer, the concentration of it is higher, and the opportunity to reduce those by doe permits is there. So that's why this would be kind of above and beyond what our normal deer harvest is.
Okay. Do any of you others have any experience with the Silver Cliff urban hunting?
Silver Cliff.
I do in the sense that my district goes up and closely borders in there. It doesn't go all the way to West Cliff, but I'm friends with the wildlife officer that's up there, and I do know that they have hunting licenses for Silver Cliff, West Cliff, and kind of the outskirts, essentially like what a Lincoln Park or North Canyon City would be for us. And as far as I know, they haven't had any issues with any dangerous situations or anything like that. And as far as from a harvest standpoint, I know that people are utilizing those licenses, and you know, if you're getting a harvest, I'm sure that they are seeing the positive effects of that harvest on the population. But that's all I can speak to. I don't know how many licenses they have or anything like that. I'm just familiar with them hunting around the city limits here.
What about them and like a minimum acreage? for urban?
I don't know. I could not comment on that.
Okay.
I had heard, excuse me,
Go ahead.
the county mayors just met, and that was one of the discussions. It was 35 acres. He figured they had a harvest of 80, about 80, and they had no adverse, that he knew about, complaints or problems with it, and he seemed to be quite happy with it.
So you had to have a 35-acre lot to be able to do the urban deer hunting?
Yeah, well, there's some,
That's not really
Silver
big.
Cliff and West Cliff is
Yeah.
big, but there's, so that would be impossible probably in Canyon. I would have to consider something larger than an acre, though. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling that too.
Yeah.
Councilman Meisner.
Can I ask the group, does everybody understand the concept of numbers? I think one of the problems we have is most people do not recognize or realize that currently I could get me an archery license if I could draw and shoot a deer off my back porch or my front porch. And that's perfectly legal today.
You were
And
12
most people.
12 feet elevated, 10 feet
No,
elevated?
I don't.
No?
I could be sitting there smoking a cigar and having a cup of coffee and shoot a deer off my front porch with a bow today. And most people do not realize that that exists within the city. And then they don't realize that I'm just going to do a relationship, that the numbers that Brian's talking about, for example, would be to cover the county. Let's say 30 licenses. If you're in the city, you're drawing your license out of that whole county area, and your odds of getting a license are remote. What we're trying to do is shrink that whole area down to, let's say, the city limits, and say, as an example, we're going to allow 10 licenses specifically for within the city, so that we could get those population withdrawals down. Make sense?
Yes.
I have a question about that. You were talking about areas and where they seem to migrate. Do they typically migrate consistently in certain areas, or do they just kind of go all over the place?
In the areas north of the Arkansas River, we've had a long-term survivability study going on. And what that entails is radial collaring a certain amount of does every year so that we have a set number of collars out on the landscape. And same thing with fawns. We put collars out on the fawns, and then we monitor them. And it's to determine how many of those animals survive throughout the year, and then we can apply that number statistically to the unit. We don't see a large number of deer migrating into Canyon or collared deer that we are able to collar on the outskirts, either leaving. So unlike some areas where you have long distance migrations, in the Salida area, we've got radioed collared deer that will winter outside of Salida and Buena Vista, yet those deer will summer over in Camp Hale and in the I-70 corridor, really. So you see a large movement there. And our seasons around Buena Vista and Salida are designed to address deer that are more year-round residents and not have an impact on those migratory animals. So here in Canyon City, what we were looking at was proposing a season for October, November, and to lessen, if there is any impact at all, on migratory deer. It doesn't seem like we get deer coming from a long distance into town or into the proximity of Canyon City. And some of that's due to the habitat types that we have outside of town here.
So then my question would be, do we have enough data to say we want a tag here, one here, one here, one here, so that we're evenly distributing the people with the ability to help the harvest?
Normally what we do on that, and on this issue paper, we have defined a geographical area that license would be valid in.
Okay.
And so, you know, that alone puts some sideboards on it and kind of directs that pressure into closer to the city or within the city to those animals that the individuals have concerns over. Hunters have a tendency to kind of spread themselves out a little bit. And then the other thing is, anytime anyone hunts on private property, they have to have the permission from the private landowner. It can be verbal, doesn't have to be written, but he or she has to have permission from that landowner. And a lot of times that is kind of a self-regulator there, in that a landowner may let someone on, you know, and then if they harvest, wait a while, let somebody else on. But most of them don't have 10 people hunting all at once. And so that has the effect of kind of spreading that hunting pressure out a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? I'm going to take a comment from the public. Carol, if you want to come up.
I thought there'd be more people involved with this issue, but I'm here. I'm Carol Dunn. I live at 380 Barrett in what used to be called East Canyon when I moved there, and there weren't many deer at that point in time. My main concern is safety, and it's a couple of different kinds of safety. Last year, there was an incident where someone about 4 blocks away from me took a deer with an arrow, and of course they didn't kill the deer. So here it comes, 4 blocks over up Barrett, and dropped in my neighbor's front yard. Well, they happened to not be home, so the hunter had followed the deer, and half of his family too, I think, had followed him, and they couldn't get on the property to take care of this wounded deer. So meanwhile, a circus ensued on Barrett. We had people driving up and down, including a lady on a bike with a baby strapped on her back and a toddler on a tricycle. And, you know, it could have turned into something really bad if that deer had have bolted and hurt somebody. So I understand the concerns if there is an in-town hunt. However, I think probably the other safety concerns are maybe outweighed, but they may be more important. In my neighborhood, across the street from me, where there's an empty lot, there are 7, at times 7 bucks in various bigness of racks, you know, up to 5 to 6 points. Big guys, I mean body-wise too. I'm concerned that during the rut season, or if they're startled or something, one of these bucks is going to charge somebody, a dog, a person walking, because on Barrett we have a lot of people walking. And my other concern is that they're going to jump out in front of somebody and the car's going to hit them. Last year, a friend of mine had actually had the deer come almost into her car, on top of the car, and she was a little bit injured. It actually came into the car with her, but she wasn't really terribly injured, but that's scary. And that's another concern, that somebody gets startled and goes off the road and hits a telephone pole. Now we've got another situation. So I like you said, this hasn't happened overnight. I've seen the deer population increase year by year by year. And of course, I've used the Colorado law that I fence them out. So I've had roses this year, thank you very much. But not everybody does that. And I know some people actually encourage, oh, they're so pretty. Well, there's situations where animals and people don't mix, and this is one of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. So we probably need to move along. Do we support the concept of an urban deer hunt? And then we can go over the details. So should we do just the thumbs up, or Caitlin, are you in favor of pursuing this conversation?
Yeah, I'm not against it.
Meisner?
I'm not against it.
Mayor?
I'd like to make a comment to Carol. Is that kind of like grandma almost got run over by a reindeer?
Oh, my God.
Just, okay, I just,
He's only allowed to do that as
I'm
Gonzalez?
also in favor.
Okay, Jaquez?
Yeah, I see too many points where we're going to have a lot of liability issues and stuff like that, and I realize these folks can only do so much with regards to the laws that they have to work with and everything else. But I thought it was a dead issue a while back, and I think personally, I think it should be a dead issue again, okay? Because I'd hate to see us giving out, I don't care whether it's 10, 5, or whatever the case may be, extra license for the city of Kansas City for a rifle, but it allows you to go downward, all right? And just like the lady's talking about over there, you know, we're gonna have a lot of people running around with rifles, with bows and everything else, looking for these things, all right? They're just gonna be out there looking for them, and I think that's gonna create a situation that can involve problems with the wildlife department, our police department, because you're going to have citizens, they're going to call the police department saying, there's this guy going up and down the street, he's got a rifle and he's looking around and everything else. So I think we just let it die, learn to live with the situation we have, and the best thing we can do as citizens is do not feed the animals. I know there's a lot of, you know, flowers and stuff like that for them to eat. They've eaten some tulips from my wife's flower bed, but she wasn't too mad because they just took the tulips and didn't mess with anything else. So I think I'm letting it die, and let's learn to live with the situation we have. I'm not saying it's not, I don't think it's out of control at this point.
Okay, so right now we have 5 that are in favor of pursuing the conversation and 1 that's against. And so I think we better have some more conversation about the parameters that we would feel comfortable with. And one of those I want to make clear, you can't in the city have a rifle and use it. And when you would issue those licenses, even though it's a rifle license, would those patrons know clearly that if they're hunting in town that they would not be able to use the rifle?
They should. And like I say, issuing that license wouldn't eliminate or supersede any city or county regulation or rule that you have. It's illegal now, my understanding, to discharge a firearm within the city limits of Canyon City. These licenses would not allow that. That would still be prohibited based on city ordinance or city statute. So
that might need to be part of the education. So we have a list of things that we had talked about last time in our conversations.
And
Yes?
just on that point, would your officers then be responsible for helping us enforce that within the city if we do issue licenses? Or what law enforcement entities will be enforcing that then?
That'd be a police matter.
Well, if they're discharging a weapon, that's a violation of city ordinance, but this program is the requirements of the state. And Ashley just mentioned, I don't know if you have a copy in front of you, we have a 12-point program that I believe is consistent with their plan, and you might just want to make sure that their plan includes all these 12 points. And we can bring this matter back.
Do they have a copy of the 12 points?
Yes.
Do you have a copy?
yeah, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
And like I say, I think, the discharge of a firearm within the city limits would be under the purview of the police department.
Right.
That's a city ordinance or a city statute. We would be willing to increase the public awareness or education on those licenses. As I see, it's generally going to be a smaller number of licenses. We haven't talked about what the numbers would be. But it would probably be, and I would imagine that the majority of them are going to be drawn by people that live in or around Canyon City. So that would be, something that we could help with.
So let me read off some of our,
I guess,
Thanks.
and it's
Yeah,
follow-up
go
to
ahead.
that answer then. Have we talked to the chief about their involvement or their opinion on having this program, if that's going to be part of their enforcement responsibility?
I mean, they would generally respond to any complaint where a firearm was discharged within the city.
Well, I understand
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
I just wonder if we've sought their input on this idea then.
I don't remember if he was at the,
Yeah, Chief's aware of this. He has no issue with this. Again, it's largely
So
a
we have,
division of
we have sought
wildlife.
his input then, is the
What's that?
answer.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
we've
thank
talked
you.
about it,
That's what I
yes.
was asking.
Commissioner Payne, do you have any questions or opinions on this conversation?
Well, yeah, would we be looking at a special season and increasing your licenses? Would we do it X amount north of the river and X amount south of the river, and would that include Lincoln Park?
The boundaries that we submitted on the draft issue paper, and I can read those off, and so that might help a little bit. And it was kind of difficult to kind of, there's not an easy box to wrap around here as far as county roads and stuff like that. But the way it was written, the proposed hunt boundaries were, and you kind of start on the north and go clockwise around. So bounded on the north by a straight line connecting US Highway 50 and North Street. So if you can imagine that, in Canyon City. It would be bounded on the east by McKenzie Avenue, 4 Mile Lane, and then on the south by a straight line connecting Pinion Avenue to Fremont County Road 143. And then it would go Fremont County Road 143 and the Tanner East Bear Gulch Trail, which is trail number 1333. And then on the west, it's bounded by the BLM U.S. Forest Service boundary, Temple Canyon Road, and U.S. Highway 50. So that's the proposed boundaries. And like I say, it was difficult because we didn't have a drainage to bound it on the north or whatever. We wanted to incorporate both some areas north and south of the Arkansas River based on concerns that we had heard from the public and from council.
Okay.
And how many licenses are we talking about? Have we determined that?
Yeah, we haven't set that number yet. You can ease into this. You don't have to open the doors right away and then try to close them. You can ease into it, see what the success is, what any issues are, and then adjust accordingly from that.
Okay.
But we did get a copy of the 12 points. We can talk about those because there's some that I think need clarification or maybe just
Let's take
how
them
they're
one point
worded.
at a
Do we have
time.
extra copies of that list?
That'd be
I
nice
didn't-
if everybody
I didn't
could
print
have
one
that.
off.
oh, this?
Yeah, do
Yeah.
you have one?
And I assume these
Was
are
there
the
a
12
council
points
packet?
Yeah, but it's for these
from the
folks down
Oh, for
here.
them?
memo
Yeah.
that Tony had out.
So we'll make some copies for reference, but let's,
We're
to
good.
keep,
Thank you. Cindy, we're fine.
well, I think these folks might like
Oh,
to have a copy as
okay.
well.
Yeah, I guess we need some.
They have seen them.
You have them? Okay, so you have it by email. So let's start with number 1, increase the number of deer hunting archery licenses. So I think we have covered that. That's something that we could ease into and regulate based on its success. Restrict hunting to daylight hours.
Yeah, under current state statute, big game hunting is allowed half an hour before sunrise to half an hour to sunset.
So that's consistent.
Yes.
Okay. Hunters must shoot from some sort of elevated stand within a minimum height of 10 feet.
Okay, that's currently not a state requirement and probably wouldn't be on these licenses. If it's something that council wanted to look at, which would be something new, within the city of Canyon City. My understanding is you currently don't have that requirement, but it's something that council could look at if they so desired.
And that was to prevent the loss of arrows. Is that
Yeah,
right?
it was a safety, it was a recommendation, a safety consideration that someone from any elevated structure, I don't know that I would necessarily say that it had to be 10 feet or 12 feet, but any elevated structure is then going to give a line of fire on that archery or that arrow down into the ground, you know, in a downward motion.
Right, and I did some research on some communities that do urban hunting, and that seemed to be their standard as well. Did you have a comment, Mr. Meisner?
I did, but I don't remember what it was.
Concerning 10 feet? Is so
Oh,
from,
I do.
yeah.
Does that still make sense from all of your excuse me, from all of your perspectives? Does that still make sense that we would, that would increase safety?
Yes, I agree with you. It does make sense because like we talked earlier, you know, you're projecting that arrow in a downward motion or downward direction, which is always going to increase safety considerations.
All right, so is council comfortable with the 10-foot stand? Yes?
Is 10 foot reasonable?
I think it's probably excessive.
Yeah, it
What
could-
would you suggest with your experience?
Yeah, I've seen stands of varying heights. You know, I've seen them from 6 feet to 15 feet, and a lot depends on, you know, are they using that stand as more cover concealment or just elevation above brush or cover, things like that. So, you know, I would think the other thing that enters into that is distance that an individual is shooting. So, you know, the shorter distance, the sharper the angle, regardless of what the height is, whether it's 6 or 10 feet. If it's out there a little bit, then the angle or trajectory increases a little bit, and it becomes more of a flatter shot. So, you know, if you have a range, you know, 5 to 10 feet, the thing, we always look at regulations, and they always have 3 bases to them. They're either biological, they're safety, or they're monetary. The requirement for somebody to buy a license. But we also look at enforceability. You know, who's going to enforce it, and what's the likelihood that regulation will be enforced or easily understood by the public as well.
That's where I'm kind of going with this, because this seems a little vague, some sort of elevated stand. I know most hunters would know what that means, but I don't hunt, so I don't know what that means. I could picture somebody on a ladder trying to hunt and losing their balance, and then the arrow going in a completely different direction. So
You can't regulate common sense, though, Darrell. I found that out.
you're
Madam
right,
Chair.
Mr. Payne, you're right.
Meisner?
Would it maybe make sense to, the elevated stand was an issue of safety relative to the proximity or size of the area and relative to the travel distance of a normal arrow. Would a more common sense alternative be a 5-acre minimum versus a 1-acre minimum, so we're less likely for that arrow to travel outside of that area? Not worry about the elevated?
It will really reduce the opportunities for hunting.
I don't know.
Yeah, how many 5-acre plots do we have in
Not many
town,
within the city.
Yeah, but
if any?
Well,
I think one of the successes for Silver Cliff and West Cliff, they're on 35-acre lots.
Yeah.
And that is a huge factor in the safety and the interfacing of neighbor versus neighbor. I also had a deer that was shot by somebody else on BLM land, and it came into my yard and died in my yard. And I don't know how many miles or whatever he was away when he shot that deer. But the unfortunate part is that he knew it was in my yard and we were home, and he was told that he couldn't knock on our door and let us know that, because as we see from all the letters that we've had from those who are passionate for animal rights, and that would put him into jeopardy to knock on my door if I happen to be really passionate against him killing animals. And so the deer meat was wasted, and it was really sad and tragic. And so I worry about the deer traveling into other private property. And so the larger the acreage, the better. And I'm really concerned, not so much about people's flowers, but for those who do have fields, that that's a monetary issue for them when their fields are devoured by these deer. And those are larger acre lots. And they are so full of deer, it's really not going to be a problem to have an opportunity to harvest them. And they make great meat because they're grass-fed.
Can I ask a question of these gentlemen? Okay. Somewhere along the line, we're going to have to draft an ordinance to go along with some of the things that aren't covered within your guidelines, now that we're going to put it into the city limits, whether it's allowing 10 or whatever the case may be. But does the ordinance, if we should design one, does your department have to okay it before they would go ahead and issue the amount of extra license for that period in there, based on your regulations that you have to work with?
We wouldn't necessarily have to approve it as an agency. And I guess, I hope that we're not overthinking the process or what we're talking about here, because really what we're talking about is no changes into what is currently allowed. Right now, my understanding on Canyon City ordinances is if a person owns a single lot that's 20 feet wide by 80 feet long, and he can safely discharge a bow on that lot, that he can legally do that now, as long as he has a license for what he's hunting. And so sometimes when we're discussing this, we're I think taking the approach that we're really starting with a clean slate, and we're not recommending any changes to city ordinance. It's an expansion really of the program that's currently there, and what that expansion is a longer season length for antlerless deer, and maybe an increase in number of doe licenses, so people that want to do that have a better chance of drawing that license and not waiting 4 or 5 years. And at the same time, using that as a tool to address the concerns that have been expressed to us by people of the community and members of the council.
Right, and I understand that, but we do have a duty to our citizens too that have a lot of really uncomfortable feelings about enhancing and expanding urban deer hunting, and some fears revolved around it. So if we want to talk about acreage size.
Well, actually, can we go back to, I just want to share a little success that I had this summer. When we met in April, there was a gentleman who got up and he spoke about something called a yard guard. And I haven't had flowers in my yard in years because the deers eat them. I live right by the hogbacks, and they just come and they feast on all of it. So everywhere I went, I looked for one of these yard guards. And I found one at True Value, $25. You put the batteries in, you stick it in the yard. I've had flowers all summer, and I've not had any deer in my yard. You can see them coming down or coming up the hill, and then they'll start backing away and moving on. So that's just something that people on smaller lots or in town could really.
Part of the education piece.
Yeah, part of the education piece. It doesn't have to be a yard guard. It can be something that's similar, but it worked. It worked for me, so that was great.
Is it a visual deterrent or a noise?
It's a noise.
A noise.
You can't hear it, but it's a box about this big. and you can turn it up or down depending on what you're trying to deter. So I have mine turned all the way up. Doesn't bother my dogs, it doesn't bother anyone else, but it's kept the bunnies away, it's kept the deer away. I still have squirrels and all of those.
Good death.
And the neighbor's dog always comes to my yard still too, so. But it did work. And it's just a little box with a prong at the bottom so you can stick it in like the center of your yard. And you don't hear it, you don't see it, you don't, anything.
That's good to know. Council Member Turner, you've been waiting for a comment.
Oh, I actually wanted to ask you what you ended up having to do with that deer in your yard then. Did you have to remove it?
After the children discovered it later in the afternoon, because it's far in our lot, and we called the Division of Wildlife, and they knew who the hunter was and contacted him, and that was his tag. His deer was tagged. He had to come and collect it, and he just had to dispose of it himself. It was but I wondered, like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Because I've had this situation on my property. It was a deer. It wasn't a hunted deer. It just happened to die in my field. And if it's on your property, you're responsible for removing it. So we had to haul it to the dump ourselves. And because it had died in the field and we didn't discover it for several days when it was 90-some degrees outside, it was a gruesome event. So and that is a concern that I have. I mean, I don't know that it happens commonly, if it's likely that we'll have a deer that's shot and dies elsewhere and is not retrieved by the hunter. But that is something I think we need to be aware of when we're talking about this, is it is not a pleasant event if you're not the person who killed that deer to have to remove it. And for most of our citizens, I don't know how they would do it if they didn't have a vehicle and a trailer and the strength to lift that deer up and get it to the dump. It was not pleasant.
Councilman Meisner.
Mr. Payne,
Mr. Meisner. Councilman.
theoretically, how many, and maybe Zach or Bob, would the 5-acre expansion or requirement, would that open up the area for just basically bow hunting, crossbow, provide us with an area that's large enough, but still within the city and your area, having enough areas where people could hunt to have an impact?
For me, personally, on the Canyon City South District, the south side of the river, I think that 5 acres is going to be a little large to address some of the critical issues that I'm having with game damage. One place in particular that deer are impacting a crop at a pretty significant level would not fall within those parameters. I would think if you're going to do something that you're not comfortable with, maybe an acre, I would make it the lowest number that you can, just to address some of those issues, because there are people that have 2-acre hayfields that are being impacted as well. But the one place that I'm thinking about is seeing significant damage to a crop that they rely on for a monetary to make a living on, and it would not fall under the 5-acre parameters, and that would be.
What acreage is it?
What's that?
What acreage is it?
Oh, you're probably talking, what do you think, 2 acres?
Yeah, probably.
Probably 2 acres, 2.5 acres, something like that. And really, guys, that 2 acres, a 2-acre garden, a 2-acre produce field and stuff, that can be impacted to the point where people lose a significant amount of money, especially now with the popularity of our farmers market and stuff. You drive by the farmers market and you see the number of people there. That's a significant impact to those produce producers' livelihood. So I would encourage you to lean towards something smaller than 5 acres.
Do you have something?
Salida has the program and has been successful. What was their minimum acreage?
Around Salida, we have some really definable geographical boundaries that we use. Salida does not have or prohibits the discharge of firearms and archery equipment within the city limits of Salida. So what we did was we issued an increased number of doe licenses, in an area that really surrounds Salida, and trying to target deer as they leave the city limits or before they get into the city.
So they don't have it within
Yeah, they don't
Salida
hunt within the
itself.
town itself. And the structure, some communities lend themselves to that and others don't, depending on the amount of open space, lot size, and things like that. But we've been fairly successful in targeting deer right on the outskirts of town that I think has positively impacted the number of deer in that area. We still have deer in town that they don't leave town. I mean, they're smack in the middle of town year-round. And that program around Salida does not address those deer or those concerns.
But in Spring, the standard you had been talking about was 3 acres, and the feedback we were getting from people that did voice their concerns, both particularly hunters and property owners, was they preferred something closer to a 1 acre. And that's why we put that in there.
The chief is also comfortable with a 1 acre lot.
Yeah.
Other than he had suggested, I don't know how, we got to be careful not to make this too complicated, but he was saying if you're doing a crossbow, maybe bigger, but the chief is generally comfortable with a 1 acre lot.
Well, what's the consensus of council?
I haven't changed my mind. I think we should leave it alone, just a dead issue.
So let's say hypothetically, if it's not left alone, Frank, and we do have to make a decision, would you prefer a 1 or 2 acre minimum?
And I've read all the stuff that's in there, so. And I appreciate everything you guys are doing, okay? Because in a sense, we're asking you, things to help not only resolve our problems within the city, but your problems that you're having, dealing with the situation you have, regardless of what the city is looking at doing, okay? So I envy your job and everything. You guys do a tough job, okay?
Dolly, what's your opinion, 1 or 2 or 5?
I think 1 acre is
Mayor?
suffice.
I'd feel more comfortable with 2. 1 acre?
Yeah, 1 acre's fine with me. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other.
Okay, so we'll stick with 1 acre for now. So let's go back to the stand, because since it's down to 1 acre, the feet of the stand. 10 feet, some of you thought that was too excessive. What would be your recommendation?
I would say, if you were going to put the requirement on it, that it had to be elevated, that you do have a range of that, 4 to 10 feet, somewhere in there, that somebody could safely, get up off of a deck or make a platform where they're going to stand on it safely. I mean, 10 feet is a pretty significant distance. I mean, if you have a ladder and you get up on the top of it and you're looking at 10 feet, that's pretty steep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so do you want to say 4 or 5, 10 feet? To 10?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Dolly.
4 sounds good to me because you're elevated. And the people that are going to be pulling these tags are going to be, they're going to know how to hunt.
So you're okay with 4?
I'm
4
okay
to
with
10?
4 to 10.
Mayor?
4 to 10.
Okay, Eisner?
Well, I don't like the 4 to 10, but I like the 4. I mean, what's 4 to 10 mean? Just, I say a
Just
minimum
say
of 4.
Minimum of 4.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Minimum
is
of
there a
There
reason
you
you'd have
go.
an upper
Okay.
limit?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Less
So at least 4.
confusing.
Yeah, that's fine.
So minimum of 4. So let's move on. Hunters must acquire written or verbal permission from landowners with a minimum, okay, we did the 1 acre, but we all agree they need verbal permission, I'm sure. Is that right?
That's a deal.
Yeah.
DLB standard.
Yes.
The issue of wounded deer moving to private property requires property owner consent to retrieve deer.
That's correct. The state law requires that a hunter make a reasonable attempt to recover or retrieve any animal he may have wounded or killed. And if that animal goes onto a property where he does not have permission, then he or she must attempt to get permission from the landowner. There's not a requirement for the landowner to grant that permission. The landowner can say, no, don't want you on my property. The hunter has met his legal requirement. There is no recourse or to the landowner that doesn't allow the retrieval of that animal. It's just that's the end of the issue there. So, you know, people don't have to fear that, well, I'm going to have to let someone on my property. And on the flip side, hunters are going to have to make a reasonable attempt to retrieve that animal, and at a minimum, that's contacting the landowner and trying to gain permission. So the issue of wounded deer moving on the private property requires property owner consent to retrieve deer would be a correct statement as law currently is written.
Okay. Consider hunting proficiency experience and a minimum age requirement.
In Colorado, you have to be a minimum 12 years of age or older to hunt big game. And not only is there an age requirement, you also have to have successfully completed a hunter education course, which varies in length, but generally it's up to 12 to 15 hours. We do have some courses online that you have to pass a proficiency test or safe handling of a firearm at the conclusion of that. And so our hunter education courses cover, you know, ethics, biology, law enforcement, know your target and what's beyond it, the 10 safety rules of hunting. So that currently is in place under our requirements to obtain a license.
So but I'm wondering, with our survey saying that that they would support urban hunting if we had some requirements like proficiency and experience. I'm not sure if a 12-year-old who passes the regular hunting
Well, with that, though, on the
safety
12-year-old,
would qualify.
the 12-year-old could purchase a license, but they're required to have a mentor with them that's over the age of 18. So it's not just a random 12-year-old kid's going to be out there slinging arrows. By law, he's required to have a mentor that has a hunter education card with him as well to be with those kids.
Is there an enforceability possibility that we could have more experienced hunters? In some communities, they have to actually go and actually physically go and shoot targets to get like a passing grade to get the special license to hunt in town. I don't know if we need to go to that extreme, but is there a way that we can have more experienced hunters that hunt within town on an acre lot?
Yeah, the draw system doesn't really allow for that, you know, as far as giving the licenses to a certain segment of the population or not. I think the best thing we have, like Bob said, is that if it is a younger hunter, then they do have to have an adult or a mentor with them. They're not out there by themselves.
Are there any other comments from council on this issue? No?
Ashley?
Yes?
You know, I bow hunted for 15 years, and it seemed to me, and you guys can weigh in, because it's been 10 years since I've bow hunted, but it seemed to me like the guys I ran into in the field was better and more respectful hunters than your rifle hunters. And they respected laws. It just seemed to me like, and you guys can weigh in, maybe it's changed in the 10, 12 years since I've hunted, but you just had a more respectful bunch of hunters, it seemed to me like.
I would say that the archery hunters, in general, I feel probably put a little more time and effort into practicing their art, opposed to a rifle hunter that has, you know, maybe a little bit chance for a little more error, where if you hit a deer with a rifle, you know, a little far back, it's still going to accomplish what you want it to accomplish, maybe just in a longer period of time. Where as an archer, I feel that they're probably a little more proficient with their marksmanship, and also some of the, you know, taking a shot that is an ethical shot as well. So I generally don't see a lot of young archery hunters out in the field. I think it's also a sport that, you know, it takes a little bit of strength, and also a lot more practice with the bow before they go out hunting. We do have a minimum requirement on the poundage of bow that you can hunt with. It has to be set at 35 pounds, which, you know, there's some 12-year-olds that aren't going to be able to pull that bow back and fire as safely, so they wouldn't, you know, probably be out hunting with that type of a setup.
Okay. Let's move on to require bow hunting and rifle education classes prior to license issuance. So we've covered that.
That's required by law.
Public education program on deterring deer from yards.
That, there's, you know, the information we received this evening was good information on someone that had a success story there. There's a lot of Colorado State University Extension Service. They offer information on deer deterrence or plants that are less desirable for deer. There's a lot of information out there on things individuals can do, whether it's fencing or the types of plants they have in their yard, or like the device that you got. I don't know the best way to get that out to the public.
Tony, what?
Yeah, I've talked to Christy about this. She'd be happy to put a program together in concert with Division of Wildlife through social media and traditional media to educate the public about reducing, you know, particularly, as Dolly indicated, some of the techniques to reduce deer from eating vegetation in people's yards.
Okay, and then, yes.
I thought Zach sent me some information. Did you not, from CSU?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did, yes.
And I
We have
forwarded it to the city, and I was under the impression that information was going to be put on the website.
Yeah.
Is that done?
No, not until this program is adopted, but it'll be much more thorough than that. That's just one piece of literature. We'll do much more comprehensive.
Because
than that.
Zach had forwarded us some,
Yeah, we have
some
that. She has
plant
that.
species, if I recall right, that would help.
So, yeah, I think it
Minimize.
would be nice to have something
currently
maybe
not part of
a little
their
more
diet.
aggressive education.
Mhm.
Okay, Turner?
Oh, and I would just say, I don't think there's any need for us to adopt this program for us to have that information on the website, so.
That's what I thought they were
Yeah.
going
Yeah,
to do.
that's true. Irregardless, we need to have education.
Correct. This also made me think maybe we could ask the folks from CSU, I don't know if they do public talks, but maybe we could work out something with the library and have a talk there. Something we could explore. I'm meeting with them this week, so I can ask whether that's a possibility or if they've done that type of public education before.
Sure, yeah, and I know the extension service at the county, they've addressed like Dawson Ranch HOA, talking about types of plants that they should and shouldn't grow and things like
Sure.
that. So, okay, here's the last one. On the 12 points of no dressing or cleaning at kill site.
That, you know, would have to be a city-type ordinance, because as far as from an agency standpoint, you know, we have a legal requirement that they dress that animal, immediately dress that animal, prepare for human consumption. I'm trying to think, I don't know on the deer that we have had harvested in and around Canyon City over the past couple of years, the issues with that or you know, so one thing to consider on that, if a person's hunting on his own property and he has, you know, anywhere from 1 to 5 acres, how he chooses to, you know, dispose of those.
Yeah, but
I
if you're
guess.
hunting on somebody else's property or the deer lands on someone else's property, they may
Yeah.
not like to have it cleaned on the neighbor's yard.
Yeah, that, and, you know, probably the way to word that, I think, would be dressing or cleaning an animal is dependent on landowner permission. And so, you know, if a landowner does say, yeah, I'll let you hunt, but if you kill something, you need to take it outside in the county or whatever, or off the property before you clean it. That would be, I think, something between the hunter and the landowner as a landowner concern.
Meisner?
Wasn't there a Title VIII issue on slaughtering?
Excuse me?
I think it's don't we have an ordinance?
It
on
was
Wasn't there a
for
slaughtering issue?
a slaughterhouse.
I didn't think, yeah, but I thought it referenced that verb.
I I'd have to double check.
I
don't
thought,
recall that.
because we had a discussion, I thought it was relative to if someone was operating like a business, not just personal.
Okay. Clearly, it's happening today.
Any other
It has been
comments?
happening for a long time.
Any other comments from council?
What, Timmy?
Tim, do you have a comment? Do you see this being something that the county would utilize?
I would, if I could get a copy of what you were reading off there, so I can take it to my fellow commissioners. And I guess one question, would we need to also adopt the same? Because it's legal in Fremont, or in,
It is.
out in Lincoln Park now.
It's legal in both areas right now, including the city. The only, basically the Reader's Digest version, what we're looking at doing is having a geographical area and adding more licenses.
Adding more
That would be good
licenses.
for that area.
Okay.
So in the county, they would, that's why the license we'd recommend would be a rifle license, because in the county, where the license would also be valid, they would be able to use a firearm or a shotgun with slug or something like that if they wanted to.
Yeah, I think, Tim, in answer to your question from my perspective is we've got some special limitations relative to the city. I don't know that the county would want to consider special limitations relative to Lincoln Park because of the urban setting, but I don't know. That would be, you know, you're going to have some people in Lincoln Park that are concerned, have the same concerns that our citizens have about safety. And I don't know whether you'd want to adopt similar regulations or just leave it as it is now, because right now I assume there are no limitations from the county.
Now,
However, don't you need to have kind of a green light from county to increase the number of
no,
licenses?
probably wouldn't,
No?
would you?
No?
You could go ahead and do that
No.
today.
I'll just get the phone call from Rocky Mitchell, and when he was complaining about somebody running through his yard with a crossbow, but, you know.
Okay,
Well,
so do we have the information that you guys need to move forward?
Okay, I was going to add one more thing, and it's just that, you know, like we stated when we started, these don't supersede any other regulation that's on the book or regulations that we enforce. If somebody is hunting without permission with one of these licenses, that's just like hunting without permission with any other license, and we'll respond to that and address that accordingly. But I didn't catch your question, I'm sorry.
I just wonder if you had the information that you needed. For example, some of the things that are a little different is that we do want the hunters to be in a 4-foot minimum elevation, 1 acre of land, and that the dressing or cleaning needed to be pursuant to property owner permission or preference.
Yeah, and I think we can assist with the education of those individuals that draw these licenses with those requirements. And I think between the city and us, we can get the word out on those, that these are the guidelines we'd like. It would be difficult to get those requirements into state statute or state regulation.
As I'm understanding it, they would provide the licensing and numbers. If we've got special requirements outside of DOW's regular regulations, that's what we would establish, as Frank mentioned, in some type of an ordinance? Am I correct?
Yes, correct.
So we got two enforcements. This is that, you know, somebody didn't shoot from an elevated stand, that becomes a police issue versus a DOW issue. So some of those things are real challenging, and that's why caution against the complexity is because these special things would be a local law enforcement issue, not a DOW. Not that those people wouldn't work together, but you'd have to call the police department.
Or would that be code enforcement?
No, it'd be the police.
It'd be the police department if
Yeah.
it's an ordinance.
Yeah.
And I will add one thing to that. In cases in town where we've had complaints of, you know, people harvesting deer, we, the game wardens, Bob and I, have always worked closely with the police department. They might be closer, they respond it's a Division of Wildlife or Parks and Wildlife issue, they call us or whatever. So there's always been cooperation between those two entities and will continue to be that. If they need our assistance, we're going to assist them. If we need their assistance, I'm sure that they will do the same. So as far as that goes, there should be no issues there with any kind of cooperation.
All right, any other comments or questions from council? Jim, can you make sure to get that information to Commissioner Payne?
I just sent it to him.
You already did, oh, it's already done. Okay.
My final comment to council would be that even though we have a 2-to-1 ratio relative to the surveys, if we move forward, the 1/3 are going to be probably twice the amount of vocal against this than those that are in favor of it. I've been trying to collect for 8 months with DOW the people that are having deer issues to contact me, and I've had one contact from all of those contacts that they've had that we need you people to support voice, because the people that are opposed, rightfully so, are saying, where's all this support? The only support we have right now is the survey. Just keep in mind, if we want to move forward, we are going to take some verbal heat from that 1/3. So move forward accordingly.
Jim, I think that happens with any controversial issue that comes up.
You wait.
Negative net.
Well, and I think, we could, if we wanted to, just try this for one season,
Yeah.
a year,
Right.
and see how it goes, and then if it doesn't
It's a
work for us,
year-to-year
we
type
can
of
repeal
thing.
the ordinance, I suppose.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, to ease it in, and we're looking at a long-term solution.
Yeah, I think that would be the prudent way to go. Like I say, we'll go through the process with your agreement this year on identifying the boundary in the hunt code, which hunters will use to apply for that license. So this will not be in effect for 2018. If approved by the commission, would be 2019. And then we'll have time to work on the number of licenses, what you guys feel comfortable with, and then based on Bob and Zach and Jamin's experience on the local scene, what will have an impact or help you with the concerns that you've expressed to us.
All right, excellent. Okay, well, I want to thank you for your time and for your expertise, and good luck this hunting season. I know you're going to be putting in a lot of
Right.
extra hours now, so
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. And this meeting is,
We did.
we already did that originally, that's why we had the conversation. So, all right, thank you, and we are adjourned.